أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. There's a story, a legend about a bird that sings just once in its life. From the moment it leaves its nest, it searches for a thorn tree and never rests until it finds one. And then it sings, more sweetly than any other creature on the face of the earth. And singing, it impales itself on the longest, sharpest thorn. But as it dies, it rises above its own agony to outsing the lark and the nightingale. The thorn bird pays the price of its own life for just one song. But the whole world stills to listen, and God in his heaven smiles. Colleen McCullough's description of the mythical thorn bird is probably the most beautiful allegory I've come across to most adequately describe Al-Abbas alayhi salam. It accurately translates the idea of a being who was conceived for the sole purpose of transcending death itself through an act of sublime beauty witnessed by heaven and earth. It also eloquently illustrates the principle that in a transformation, the alchemy of divine love comes at the cost of intense suffering and sacrifice. Al-Abbas's life was devoted to one single end: to make the earth and the heavens still to listen to the song of his sacrifice, the lyrics of which consist of 4 letters that together form the key to heaven: Hussein. It is fitting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the one who died on the thorn tree of Karbala with wings as a reward for his severed arms. How does one visit a being such as Al-Abbas alayhi salam? How do we, with our imperfections, address this being of light who turns his death into an act of sheer beauty? This question highlights our own inadequacy, and hence the need for us to be guided in our visit to Al-Abbas alayhi salam by none other than His Majesty Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, who was after all the son of one of the key witnesses to the sacrifice of Karbala, His Majesty Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. In this talk I shall discuss His Majesty's ziyara of Al-Abbas alayhi salam, focusing on 3 themes present in the text of the ziyara. I will first of all address the status of Al-Abbas alayhi salam and the way His Majesty describes the son of the Lion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My second theme will be that of the philosophy of ziyara itself and its zahiri, exoteric or external, and batini, esoteric and inner dimensions. Finally, I will discuss the theme of futuwwa or chivalry as the central ethos of the true Shia as exemplified by Al-Abbas alayhi salam. His Majesty Hazrat Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam starts the ziyara with an elaborate salutation that highlights the exalted status of Al-Abbas alayhi salam. The peace of Allah and the peace of His close angels, of His messenger prophets, of His virtuous servants, of all the martyrs and truthful ones, and of all the pure and of all the pure and good prayers be continuously upon you, O son of the commander of the faithful. The salutation includes the entirety of the ranks of the divine hierarchy, ranging from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond all creation, with the angelic ranks and prophets of the heavenly realms, to the martyrs and truthful ones on earth. This salutation encompasses an important teaching about the traditional cosmology taught in the Quran and by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The Weltanschauung, the view of the world of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, is a holistic one that always takes into account the earthly and heavenly malakuti dimensions of events. This is most notable in the use of the expression as-samawati wal-ard, which appears more than 190 times in the Quran. Whenever the term samawati is used, it is always in combination with ard, earth. The combination of both into a single recurring expression, found so many times in the Quranic text, suggests an emphasis on the relation between the earthly and the heavenly realms. The idea that the earth cannot be considered on its own, but should rather be seen as an integral part of a wider view of creation that includes the heavenly realms, with which it is in constant interaction, is quite important. The fact that samawati is a plural also suggests the idea of a plurality of heavenly realms, such as the malakut, the jabarut, and the lahut. The order of the words is invariably the same. Samawati, heavens, always precedes ardh, the earth. This also has an importance. Let's, for example, see Surah Al-Hashr, Ayah 1. سَبَلِ اللَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth or on earth glorifies Allah, and He is the mighty and the wise. The surah ends with the same set of expressions at the ayah 24. هو الله الخالق والبارئ والمصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. He is Allah, the creator, the maker, the fashioner. His are the most excellent names. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth or on earth glorifies Allah, and He is the mighty and the wise. This holistic view of the world flies in the face of the purely earthly and horizontal discourses of modernists such as the heretic Shariati, who confines the entirety of the divine project to the gutter of materialistic ambitions in a vain and childish desire to outwit the satanic forces at their own game, politics. This salutation hence reminds us that the supreme sacrifice of Karbala in general and the martyrdom of Al-Abbas in particular must be contemplated in their nasuti, human, and malakuti, heavenly dimensions. His Majesty Imam Jafar as-Sadiq addresses Al-Abbas as Ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen, or son of the commander of the faithful. This title is far from being a random choice, given that His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is in the text of ziyara addressed as Ibn Rasulillah, son of the Messenger of God. Even though strictly speaking, they are both sons of His Majesty Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen . This choice of titles for both of them illustrates the relationship between Hazrat Abbas and His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein . Abbas is to Hussein what Ali ibn Abi Talib was to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is not difficult to see the clear parallels between the two groups. For example, at the moment of their birth, both His Majesty Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen and Hazrat Abbas are graced with seeing respectively their Majesties the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Imam Hussein when they first opened their eyes. Both of them were the epitome of chivalric values at the service of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Imam Hussein . Furthermore, both of them seem to be associated with the lion. By either name or title, Haidar and Abbas both refer to specific types of lions. The idea, of course, is that both were lions when it came to their exploits on the battlefield. There is, structurally speaking, a clear attempt to show a continuity between the two sets of sacred characters. Beyond the obvious theme of boundless devotion, loyalty, and chivalry dedicated to their Majesties, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, there's a clear notion that Abbas occupies the position of the Bab, the gate, to His Majesty Hazrat Imam Hussein alayhi salam. In a sense, knowing the Imam implies knowing the gates to the Imam as well, as it will prepare the true Shia through the path of inner transformation and alchemy to finally encounter the Imam seated on the throne of his heart. There's an interesting parallel that is drawn between the battles of Badr and Karbala in the text of the ziyara. His Majesty Hazrat Imam Jafar as-Sadiq mentions that Hazrat Abbas died on the same path as the martyrs of Badr. Putting Karbala and Badr on an equal footing would at first seem paradoxical, given that from a purely worldly and military point of view, Karbala was not only a defeat but a massacre of rare brutality, where the very worst of humankind was displayed by the Umayyad forces. However, as I mentioned before, if we take into account the cosmology of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, we have to take into account the celestial malakuti reality of Karbala. Modern readings of Karbala using the corrupted lens of the heretic Shariati with its crypto-Marxist liberation theology have turned His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam into a revolutionary, thus placing the flag of the international leftist revolution in the hands of His Majesty, turning him into a turbaned Che Guevara in a disgusting and atrocious act of blasphemy. Others see Karbala as the voice of protest in the name of human rights, turning His Majesty alayhi salam into another dubious social activist like Gandhi or Martin Luther King. However, the Ahlul Bayt have clearly specified that Karbala was the fulfillment of the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made to Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَفِدَيْنَهُ بِذِبٍ عَظِيمٍ, we ransomed him with a mighty sacrifice, a reference of course to the incident of the sacrifice of the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam. His Majesty Hazrat Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam was the supreme sacrifice who took upon himself the ritual obligation for every Shia to give his head as part of the process of bay'ah. In doing so, he vouched for the acceptance of our bay'ah and the forgiveness of our sins as a consequence. It is no accident that His Majesty Imam Rida alayhi salam mentions that His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam was slaughtered like a sacrificial lamb. Hence, Karbala is not a defeat, but to the contrary, the most glorious victory, because His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam crushed death and sin through his own death. Finally, after remembering Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam and his virtues, chief among them loyalty, His Majesty Imam Jafar al-Sadiq alayhi salam asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam with the best reward ever given to anyone who has remained loyal to their bay'ah. This is an extremely important section because it is an indirect reference to the status of the Ahlul Bayt. If Hazrat Abbas is to be rewarded with the highest heavenly reward, then what about His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam? Al-Majlisi in his Hayatul Qulub mentions this hadith. The Prophet declared that the Most High created him and Ali and Fatima and Hassan and Hussein before the creation of Adam, when as yet there was neither heaven nor earth nor darkness, no light, no sun, no moon, no paradise, no hell. Abbas, the uncle of Muhammad, inquired, in what mode was the commencement, the beginning of your existence, O Prophet of God? The Prophet replied, when God willed to create us, He uttered a word from which He formed light, and then He pronounced another word from which He created spirit. He next tempered the light with the spirit, and then He formed me and Ali and Fatima and Hassan and Hussein. And we ascribe praise to God when besides ourselves there was not another existence to give Him glory. When God purposed to create the universe, He expanded my light, and from it formed the Empyrean, which being creative of my light, that is, derived from the light of God. I am therefore more excellent than the Empyrean. He next expanded the light of my brother Ali, and from it formed the angels. Consequently, he is more excellent than the angels. He next expanded the light of my daughter Fatima, and formed from it the heavens and the earth, which are therefore inferior to her. Afterwards, he expanded the light of my grandson Hassan, and from it formed the sun and the moon, so that he is superior to them. Lastly, he expanded the light of my grandson Hussein, and from it formed paradise and the Huris, therefore he is more excellent than they are. Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam thus serves as a measuring standard to help us realize the greatness of His Majesty Hazrat Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, whose status is beyond the khalq itself, as all things were created out of the light of the Ma'sumin alayhi salam. What does it mean to approach a being like Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam? And which are the implications of a ziyara? As you may already know, the word ziyara derives from the grammatical root zawara, which means to incline away, to visit. The root has both negative and positive derivatives that depend on the intention behind the inclination. For example, the term zur, which means false and appears 4 times in the Quran, clearly indicates the idea of an inclination away from the truth. Ziyara, or visit, may thus be viewed as an inclination away from the routine of our normal lives. We interrupt the usual flow of events in our life to take time out for someone else. In a sense, we are inclining away from the human time to enter the angelic time. This seems to be confirmed by a narration mentioned in the Karbala ziyarat, going back to His Majesty Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, "The days spent by those who go to the ziyara of Hussein are not counted as part of their lives. They do not reduce their time to death." It is as if the time-space continuum is suspended for those who incline away from it for the sake of Hussein alayhi salam, and thus enter the angelic time and space. In other words, while we visit the Ma'sumeen alayhi salam, our visit does take place in this world, but its time is not of this world. We enter the realm of the Malakut while remaining on earth simultaneously. The purpose of the ziyara is one that goes well beyond a mere polite visit to an important religious figure. The narrations about the spiritual rewards of the act of ziyara in general, and that of Al-Abbas alayhi salam and His Majesty Hazrat Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, place so much value on it that it is worth spending time pondering about this privileged spiritual meeting between the sincere Shia and his guides, meeting that takes place, as we earlier mentioned, beyond the limits of time. Ideally, the ziyara connects the sincere Shia with the higher realities of the faith, as amply demonstrated in the text of the ziyara. All of the central tenets of the faith are present. The salam, for example, contains in itself the central tenets of the faith, such as tawheed, nubuwwa, and imama. These principles are not mentioned in abstracto as mere theological statements, but rather as a part of a spiritual exercise in which the sincere Shia connects to these tenets through the holy person they visit. Thus, we see other fundamental doctrines mentioned in the ziyara, such as, for example, that of Raja, or in other words, the reappearance of specific holy personalities from the past during the Parusiya, the reappearance of His Majesty Hadrat Sahib Zaman, Ajal Farajahum. The text of the ziyara is in fact quite explicit on this notion, as it contains the following sentence: "I expect your return." Linked to the notion of Raja is that of resurrection. The world of Shia theology has known many controversies around the notion of bodily resurrection. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam seems to directly attack those who deny bodily resurrection by stating the following, by using the following terms. He uses the words ruh, spirit, and badan to talk about body, to talk about the blessings that are showered upon Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. Thus, His Majesty emphasizes the need to believe in this notion, the consequences of which are essential for the practice of our faith. Unlike Buddhism and other world-denying forms of thought, the Ma'sumeen alayhi salam have clearly stated that the body fully participates in the process of salvation and is not its enemy, or worse, an illusion to be discarded. Rather, the path of the Ahlul Bayt is one of spiritual transfiguration, where the body is brought back to its Edenic, heavenly perfection. Equally essential to our faith is the notion of are the notions of Tawala and tabara present in the text of the ziyara. This is emphasized by His Majesty in the following passage: "I am with you, not with your enemies." Khaja Nasruddin Tusi, in his work on tabara and Tawala, makes it very clear that tabara is a twofold act that has both a dhahiri, exterior, exoteric, and a batini, interior and esoteric aspect. The exterior aspect of tabara is to dissociate oneself from and to curse the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, while the interior aspect consists in disassociating oneself from their attributes. The revered Shaheed Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Shirazi rahmatullahu alayh explained very well the necessity for both. As specific sins are associated with specific characters of Islamic history who oppressed the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, the idea is that cursing these same enemies would turn the sin associated with them absolutely despicable in the eyes of any sincere believer. Yazid, la'natullah alayhi, is associated with the worst forms of sexual deprivation and alcohol. The sincere Shia will abstain from these scenes not only because they are forbidden, but also because they are associated with the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, such as Yazid. Were he to commit such a sin, it would be as if he had invited Yazid and his satanic armies inside his heart. This idea is clearly present in a famous hadith of our queen, Hazrat Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, who explains that the true Shia are those who not only hate whom the Ahlul Bayt hate, but also abstain from the actions that the Ahlul Bayt hate. True love in the form of Tawala is not complete without tabara. In the same way as in a marriage relationship, a husband cannot possibly claim to love his wife if he at the same time loves all the things she hates and her enemies. Thus, the text of the ziyara serves the purpose of connecting the sincere believer with the core beliefs of the one true faith. I say connecting because Iman is far, very far from being an act of the discursive mind. Rather, the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt are very clear about the fact that Iman is a spirit, a ruh, that lives in the heart, qalb, of the believer. Contrary to the rather inconsistent, fragmentary and mutilated vision of modernity about the various dimensions of the human being, the heart, qalb, is not the seat of fleeting emotions. Rather, it is the seat of the sacred intellect, the aql, through which the divine realities are perceived. When a believer sins, that spirit, the spirit of Iman, leaves his heart until he or she repents. It hence means that those who differ in their beliefs from the standards set in the ziyara, be it by doubting the notions of imama, revelation, raja, tabara, do so because of a state of grave spiritual desolation caused by their terrible sins. We hence perform ziyara to renew our faith by pledging our allegiance to the beloved while disassociating ourselves from his enemies, and by letting the spirit of Iman make our hearts its home, so that their majesties, the Ahlul Bayt, may sit on the throne of our hearts as unrivaled rulers. From the narrations, we know that Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam was conceived with the sole aim of being a knight loyal to His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. We know that His Majesty Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam had asked his brother Aqil to find him a wife who came from the most chivalrous of Arab tribes. al-Banin alayhi salam was thus chosen to bear the son of the Knight of God, who would become the leader of the Knights of Hussein in Karbala. Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, just like his father, embodied the very central ethos of true Shi'ism, that of futuwwa. Futuwwa derives from an Arabic root, fataya, which means to surpass someone in virile qualities, discernment, to be youthful, or to be a knight. So the term futuwwa, or chivalry, designates both an ethic of spiritual struggle and a social phenomenon in the Islamic societies throughout time. But according to the sayings of the Ahlul Bayt, futuwwa is rooted in pre-eternity. This is confirmed by the ziyara al-Nahya al-Muqaddasa, where Hazrat Sahib Zaman Ajal Farajahum speaks about the fact that what is so specific and so beautiful about Imam Hussein alayhi salam is that he remained loyal to the ahd and the mithaq, the allegiance that we all pledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ahd and the mithaq refer to the pre-eternal event described in the Quran in Surah Al-A'raf, ayah 172. When we brought forth by your Lord from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants, And they were made to bear witness upon their own selves. Am I not your Lord? Allastu bi rabbikum? They replied, yes, we do bear witness. Lest you should say on the day of judgment, verily we were of this unaware. This event that took place in the Alam al-Mithaq or Alam al-Dhar is known as the event of Allastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? According to the Quran and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, humanity, but also the future inhabitants of the heavens, were assembled in the form of conscious particles, dhar, that were endowed with free will. In an interesting riwayah, going back to Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, his disciple Abu Basir asked him how the particles were able to reply to the question, Allastu bi rabbikum? To which His Majesty Hazrat Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam replies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed in them what would enable them to reply to his question. And Alam al-Majlisi in his Mir'at al-Uqul sees this as a reference to the notion of consciousness or shu'ur. So this allegiance is not the result of a robotic sort of act whereby all the dhar, all the conscious particles automatically said yes, but rather it was the result of an act of free will. Now, we know from the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt that the event of the Mithaq, in the Alam al-Mithaq, the conscious particles were asked to pledge, to recognize three facts. First of all, the fact of Tawheed. So all of the souls, all the conscious particles acquiesced or replied yes to that. All the conscious particles also acquiesced and replied yes to the notion of nubuwwah. However, only a minority of conscious particles recognized the wilayah of His Majesty Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Now, this of course means that there was from the beginning, before this physical universe was even created, a rebellion that was started well before this earth was created. So the true Shia finds himself or herself in a cosmic war between the forces of the Aql, the forces of the Imam, and the forces of Jahal, the forces of ignorance, and the forces of basically the satanic leaders of evil. And this is, of course, the fact that this war started well before the creation of this physical world is acknowledged in Surah Al-Hashr, when it says, كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ أَكْفُرْ فَلَمَّا كَفَرَ قَالَ إِنِّي بَرِيٌّ مِنْكَ إِنَّ خَافُ اللَّهَ رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Like Shaitan when he tells the man, disbelieve. But when he disbelieves, he says, I'm surely clear of you, surely I fear Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Hazrat Al-Abbas alayhi salam represents the values of futuwwa, of chivalry. The word futuwwa derives from the Arabic root fataya, which means to surpass someone in virile virtues, to be young, to be a knight. Now we know from the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt that His Majesty Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam was conceived with this precise aim of being the knight of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. In fact, we can say that Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam is the presence, the physical presence of Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, this vicarious presence on the battlefield of Karbala. It's as if Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam brought into this world a son that would represent him in Karbala. Now, it's important to realize that the notion of futuwwa, of chivalry, is really the true essence of the ethos of the true Shia. You see, the true Shia finds himself or herself in this cosmic war between the forces of the Imam and the forces of their enemies. And this fight, this struggle, this war has been going on well before this physical world was created. We know from the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it's mentioned in the Quran, assembled all of the souls, or rather the conscious particles, dhar, and asked them, Allastu bi rabbikum? am I not your Lord? To which all of the dhar, all of the conscious particles replied, yes. However, we know from the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt that they were also asked to acknowledge nubuwwah, and all of them acquiesced to that, and also to acknowledge the wilaya of His Majesty Hazrat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Now, only a minority of conscious particles of dhar basically acquiesced to that and pledged allegiance to that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala formed their bodies, the bodies of all these beings, according to their replies regarding the notion of wilaya. In this war, we have to side with the attributes of the army of light, the army of the Imam. We have to fight fear with bravery, lusts with purity, cruelty with compassion. Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam demonstrated all the levels of futuwwa on the day of Ashura. He remained loyal to His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam until his death. Did bara, he disassociated himself with his enemies when he refused Shimr's offer of immunity, and demonstrated utter selflessness in accepting to perform the task of fetching water for the children, and remained so true to his word that he asked His Majesty Hazrat Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam not to bring his body back to the camp, as he felt that he had not been able to keep his promise to the princess of Bani Hashim, Hazrat Ruqayya alayhi salam. Throughout that day, during which time itself held its breath, his refusal to drink the waters of the Euphrates is the ultimate combination of tabara and Tawala. It is tabara because with a single movement of his hand, he smashed the attempts of his enemies to prevent him to reach the Euphrates. And it is Tawala because every single drop that fell from his hands back into the river proclaimed his love for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam was hope itself moving among the storm of despair. Hazrat Abbas is hope. Hope until despair itself commits suicide. His martyrdom, rather than being a victory for the armies of despair, was an utter and complete victory for the armies of light, for the armies of the Imam, because he managed to transfigure his intense suffering into an angelic miracle of sheer, unequaled beauty. And this is the lesson for us all. Instead of adopting the path of world-escaping religions like Buddhism, Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam teaches us to embrace suffering and to use it as an opportunity to transform ourselves into walking poems of love for the Imam. And this, may I remind you, was done by a man who was asked to just fetch water for the children of the camp of His Majesty Hazrat Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Simple actions can also be a gate to heroic acts of beauty. یادم ز وفای از جای الناس آید ز چشم ترم سوده الماس آید آید به جهان اگر حسین دیگری هیهات برادری چون عباس آید. When I remember the loyalty of the bravest of men, diamond-like tears flow from my eyes. Even if another Hussein were to come into this world, never would there be another brother like Abbas. Nasjudu li alamika ya Abbas. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.